Well, everybody, I am excited, especially more than usual. I'm always excited, but I'm really excited today to have Frank and Pamela on the Flower Podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know that we've had a few conversations this year, you, Pamela, and with me, and I have. I never hang up the phone. I guess, do we use that term anymore now that we all have cell phones? I don't know. I guess we don't hang up phones anymore. Anyway, I always walk away better for it. I always feel like I learned something, and you've inspired me constantly. So I'm really excited to have both of you on, and I know this is going to be a really special episode. I like to begin every episode, of course, with kind of getting your story. How did you begin flower farming? How did you get the bug to jump into the world of flowers?
Well, I guess she's pointing at me. So I just kind of fell into it back in high school. I got into the botany class and went to college at Michigan State for horticulture. Thought I'd be a plant breeder in fruit crops. I was going to go into the orchard management side of things in Michigan, because Michigan has such an enormous orchard and horticulture industry. Came down to Texas A&M to go to graduate school and fell into the greenhouse business. And before you know it, I was growing poinsettias and started my own business and met Pamela, and we set up a bedding plant business. Next thing you know, we were growing some cut flowers outside, took them into Austin, and people said, "Where did you get these?" And we said, "Well, we grew them here in the Texas Hill Country." And they said, "I want all you can grow." And that was the beginning of that.
Wow.
The bedding plant greenhouses were quickly switched over to growing cut flowers. And we went from a quarter acre to a half acre to 2 acres. And the business just grew exponentially. At one point, we had close to 40 acres in production and 12 people working in the field and over 20 employees. Thankfully, we scaled back from that. That was like, just an all-out run. So we're growing now somewhere in the neighborhood about 20 acres in Texas. Have a peony farm in northern Minnesota, and they're starting a peony farm in the mountains of West Texas, where it's much cooler. That's supposed to be a retirement plan. If that doesn't much sound like a retirement idea. We've had a lot of people come to us who have retired from another career and say they want to get into cut flower growing, and we tell them this is not a job you retire into. You want to retire from this job. You don't want to retire to this job. So if you're going to retire into growing cut flowers, you're just taking on a whole new career.
I for sure. So how did you get from Michigan to Texas?
I was recruited to go to graduate school back in the early 80s. Texas A&M was expanding their horticulture program, putting a bunch of money into it, and they called me up. I had forgotten even that I'd sent an application. And they called me up and said, "We're expecting you down here next fall." And I said, "Who? Where?" And they gave me the big spiel, we got a $10.2 million brand new building, and we got the permanent oil university fund. We got money all over the place. I said, "Sign me up." I bought a pickup truck and drove to Texas.
He bought a pickup truck that afternoon and drove to Texas. I mean, literally went out and sold his Cutlass Supreme.
My fancy souped up Detroit style Cutlass Supreme. And
he bought this pickup truck that didn't even have matching wheels. It just kind of limped out of the parking lot.
I was moving to Texas. And that was in 82, and I've never looked back. And it's the best thing I ever did.
No, Frank he just really fell into the place that felt like home.
That's important.
We're in an ideal situation for marketing, because we're located within an hour of 4 million people from the Austin and San Antonio and all the growing suburbs between them. Yet we get to live in the beautiful Texas Hill Country. So we've got the best of all worlds, and Texans are very loyal to a Texas product. So if you're going to sell a Texas flower with your name on it, you have an advantage right there.
And when we started farming, we really first started a greenhouse business, and then we had a growing family, and it was not really feasible for me to be in the greenhouse. I would walk out, and 3 days later, Frank would say, "Oh," because a baby would cry, and Frank would say, "Did you finish that job?" And I'm like, "What job?" And so we put a quarter acre of cut flowers in front of the house. The next year, the first Central Market, which is HEB's high-end grocery store, opened. And so we literally hit the ground running at the end of the first year with branding our own flowers, selling our own branded, locally grown flowers to a grocery store.
We were actually one of the first flower farms anywhere that branded their flowers on the sleeve. Back in the early 90s, when we got started, most flowers were sold in a clear sleeve. There was not a company name on it. It went to a wholesaler. Wholesaler sent it out. They didn't want any markings on it.
Right.
And we put a sticker on ours that said, "Fresh from the Texas Hill Country, Frank and Pamela Arnosky," and wanted everybody to know right from the beginning who we were and what we were doing. And it was Texas grown.
And the company we sold to, we would deliver to the back dock, and then we in buckets ready to go on the packing on the floor. And we would drag, on a cart, all those things up to the front of the store, and people would follow you down the aisles. And pretty soon they knew you delivered on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we went from 35 bouquets the first delivery to 350 twice a week by the end of the summer. It was just because of Frank's experience in the horticulture, because we brought knowledge into this in plants and farm, a little bit in farming, and Frank had worked in orchards and vineyards and things like that. We had more tools in our toolbox to be able to get the crop scaled up. And
then what we had to really learn was the marketing side.
And we had to learn the cut flower post-harvest handling side, because the ASCFG was only a year or two old at that point. And so we dived into ordering old books. There was a book from 1922 called Fritz Barr's Commercial Floriculture that Frank discovered a copy in a used bookstore, and that just opened a whole new world.
I found this book on a used bookstore shelf in West Texas, and I opened it up. It was like a golden light came out of it. I thought, where has this book been all my life? And we constantly referred to Fritz Barr and that book when we would write articles in Growing for Market. And it was from 1920s, and it described all the crops that we're growing now again. So, all the old things became new, and you could find that information from 100 years ago.
Texas was also has a really interesting climate where you can grow almost everything, but only at certain times of the year. And we had an ag commissioner, Jim Hightower, you probably heard of him. He's still out there in the world of talking about agriculture and things. But anyway, Jim Hightower had commissioned a study called The Flowering of Texas the outcome of that was that, oh yeah, you could grow cut flowers in Texas, but nobody has ever done it consistently. And
that was the key.
We took that as our challenge.
When we first went to the Central Market store and said, we grow Texas flowers, would you be interested? Because the store was very much focused on local and novelty productions or products. And we went to them and we said, we can grow a Texas bouquet. And they said, that's a great idea, prove it. And they wanted to know that we could be consistent in production, that if they're going to set aside space for us in a grocery store, you got to be there every week.
Right.
And we proved that.
And we took it on.
By the end of the year, we showed them that we could do that consistently. We could keep our quality as good as anything that came from anywhere in the world. And we could put a Texas label on it.
And so we started writing for Growing for Market by 95. Partly, and one reason that we could write for Growing for Market is Frank had grown so many different crops over the years, and so many different species of flowers, that you could bring that horticultural knowledge, present it, combine that with how much fun it is to be in Texas and talk about Texas. Frank said it was, marketing was like shooting rats in a barrel. It was right there.
Molly Ivins, late Molly Ivins, who wrote many columns about Texas, and she would get compliments on her writing about Texas. And she said, listen, it's not me, it's the material, because Texas is just so good. But,
know, I mean, every climate disaster that you could have, everything, it would all hit us, and we got to talk about it. I mean, this summer it's happened across the whole United States and Canada. It's been terrible for, all kinds of weather, but Texas does that every year.
That's just normal for Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just pretty much fasten your seatbelt and just expect a bumpy ride. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And the other piece with how we grew our business is that we believe in the relationship, and we stick to it. And we try not to promise more than we're going to be able to deliver. And then the old saying is, then you want to deliver more than you promise. And when you stay with the relationship, even when it gets bumpy and grumpy, you stick with it and you can grow through.
And she meets with the stores that we work with.
Right. Because it's all about the personality of the floral manager.
Some of the people that we work with the Central Market and HEB grocery stores, we've worked with them for going on 30 years.
The same people.
The same people. And as they've moved through the company and they've gone up to positions of being management and buyers, we know each other well. There are bumpy spots. There are spots where we hug each other. I mean, it's a fabulous relationship, but that's the key. It's the relationship. And we carry this forward every year as we're a key player for their floral department. We don't know what we do without them. They're essential to us. It's a very good working relationship, and that's key to anything that we do in business.
And as a company, the company we work, I mean, that grocery store is also a leader in the floral industry.
They're state of the art.
And because of that, we can have the expectation that they're going to train their people to take care of the flowers so that people who buy them are getting maximum base life because they've got the right water in clean buckets and the whole thing.
Wow.
And you'll hear us talk a lot about the fact that we really believe that post-harvest handling is the key to making sure that people are happy with their flowers.
Because you'll grow your sales that way. We've gotten a lot of people at the home house level addicted to buying our flowers each week because it was a good value.
Okay, well, let's jump into that because I feel like that's not a topic that we talk about a lot here on the podcast. And I don't know if that's just people don't like to share their tricks or people aren't as aware of the importance of it, but being on the wholesale side of it, having to deal with flower shops and people like that, I know the importance of post-harvest. I know the value that it brings. I mean, when you say that, what is that different for? This is a really basic question. Is post-harvest different for every flower, or is it something that you pretty much, is it a standardized practice? I'm just going to throw it out basic so you can run with it.
Well, let me first give you an example of why we consider this so important. We often get requests for wedding flowers, and it's not uncommon for somebody to ask us, if I pick up these flowers on Friday, will they still be good for my wedding on Saturday?
Oh, I know.
So the perceived value of flowers out there is something we need to work on because some people still don't think they'll last 24 hours, and we want them to last at least a week. Now, post-harvest handling is truly a science. You have to work at it. And yes, every single flower has a different requirement. You can say that there are some basic overall concepts such as flower food or making sure your water has a biocide so the bacteria aren't growing. But then when it comes to picking a rudbeckia compared to picking a sunflower or a yarrow or a ranunculus, those plants all have a different post-harvest requirement. Ranunculus are pretty much easy to deal with. Rudbeckias will wilt if you look at them wrong. And sometimes we have to pick rudbeckias only at one time in the day. If you pick them wrong, they'll wilt, or you pick them and put them in the cooler to kind of revive them. But every flower is different. That is true. But mostly there are three components to flower food and flower post-harvest that have to be adhered to. And you need most of all a biocide, because bacteria is the number one problem for post-harvest handling. If those flower stems have bacteria growing on them, they plug up, and it's just literally a physical problem. They can't get water. Secondly, the flower needs food. And if you're going to have a flower like a tuberose or a gladiola or something that's going to keep expanding, it needs an energy source. So there's sugar in there. And then the third thing is you need to treat the water with some sort of acidifier, because water goes up the stems better when the pH is lower. And so most flower foods or flower preservatives are that three-part: biocide, sugar, and acidifier. We use a holding solution for a lot of our stuff, which is lower on sugar, because we're trying to not have the flowers speed up before they get to the customer. But then everything that we sell at our home farm market has, we offer flower food, the packet of flower food, and we encourage people to use it. And that is a sugar-based flower food. But anyways, sure, the post-harvest thing is essential, because if people get home and they think their flowers don't last, they're not going to come back. And the worst thing you can have is if people think local flowers aren't as good as imported flowers, then you're really working against your market.
One thing that we've done is we always have clean buckets. So we're always washing. So that's standard across all the different flower varieties. Not leaving it, once you cut them, getting them into water and into shade immediately is also across all things. Some things will have to go into the cooler so they can cool down. Other things, it doesn't matter. But one of the biggest things we do is we think about what's the end use of this flower. So if we're sending a bouquet to the grocery store, our bouquet never has in it flowers that are going to have a short base life. I don't put a dahlia or a zinnia or a cosmos into a cut flower bouquet that person is buying expecting to last a week. We'll sell straight bunches of those other things and educate people about how long that base life is, but we don't mess it up.
When you sell a bouquet, the bouquet is only as good as the shortest lived flower in the bouquet.
Right.
So if you put a cosmos in a bouquet, your bouquet is only good for 3 days, max. If you put a zinnia in your bouquet is only good for 4 or 5 days. And the same with the dahlia. So we avoid those short-lived flowers in bouquet production because we want our bouquets to last a week. Or as somebody told me last week, I've had your bouquet for 2 weeks and it still looks good. But you can't say that with a zinnia or a dahlia or a cosmos. So we put in Lysianthus and other long Rudbeckias last forever. Marigolds. I've seen marigolds actually put out roots in the flower vase.
Right.
And, so we avoid those flowers. Now we sell those flowers. We sell dahlias and we sell zinnias, but we want to make sure that when people buy a bunch of dahlias, they understand these aren't going to last as long as
and those are great for events and special, weddings and that sort of thing where people know what they're getting. Communication is key. And we try to be as honest as possible. Like if somebody comes, and that goes back to our sleeve. If we're using a plastic sleeve, I can actually see if the foliage is going down in the bouquet. Even if the flowers look good, I don't want to sell a bouquet that the foliage is starting to go off.
Our sleeves are all vented because moisture in the sleeve is another problem with post-harvest handling. Mm-hmm. If you have a sleeve that's not vented, and if, for instance, paper sleeves are often treated with a sealant of some sort so they can withstand the water, well, that makes a tight moisture holding sleeve. And so you have two problems. You can't see the leaves if they're going down, and you're creating an environment that's high humidity, so they're going to go down faster than in a vented sleeve.
An additional thing that we've done that has extended post-harvest like crazy has been several years ago, we discovered Chris All puts out the CVB tablet.
It's called the Gerber Tablet.
That concentrated chlorine in that little tablet. We were put onto that by a woman who's no longer, unfortunately, alive, Gay Smith, who was the
technical rep for Chris All.
And we used to see her at all the cut flower grower conferences, ASC, Association of Specialty Cut Flower Conferences. And Gay says everybody had been having trouble with zinnias. And Gay suggested, and we were in the auction, and we bought the booth at the end of the auction, the trade show booth. So we had all this flower food stuff, and we had never used CVB tablets. And we said, what do we do with these? And Gay said, well, you could try those on zinnias.
Actually, we suggested it to her.
Did we?
Yeah, we were having trouble with zinnias. Everybody was, with what they call a zinnia meltdown.
Right.
It's a bacteria, and we would look at it, and we would pick the zinnias out of the bucket after 3 days, and the stems would be just mushy,
nasty.
And I said, from my background in plant pathology and horticulture, I could say that this is an organism of some sort. There's some biologically active thing going on here. And when we talked to Gay Smith, and I looked at that, and she was telling me to use it for Gerbers, I said, I bet you could use this in zinnias. And so we took it back and we experimented. And like, we often talk about, we experiment constantly about what our post-harvest handling issues are. And we said, let's try this slow release chlorine in zinnias. And it was amazing. Mm-hmm. It's like our zinnia meltdown problem was eliminated.
And so we eventually evolved this whole handling thing with zinnias are only picked in water, fresh water,
flower food, but
never a hydrator because it would give them bent neck. They would get overhydrated. So we pick zinnias into fresh water in a clean bucket. You bring them into the shed. You immediately transfer them out of that fresh water into more fresh water with Chris All tablets in it.
CVB tablet.
And then the next day I pack them to get ready to go to town, and
They're processed
or that evening.
and put into another fresh bucket with a CVB tablet.
And it's because those
So-
stems are dirty, you know, they're hairy.
So our
And-
zinnias have 3 changes of water before they get to the store.
And so then when they last, you know, 5 to 11 days for people who do their part also with keeping the
And
water
it is,
clean.
we have never had meltdown problems again
Yeah,
since we started
exactly.
this CVB issue.
It's a lot of
process.
handling, but it's a flower, as you all know, it's a huge fallback.
Oh, they're so popular right now.
Oh, yeah.
And we do everything we can to make sure the zinnias last as long as they can,
Right.
because they are a short-lived flower.
Well, that's fascinating, because I know I've heard about that, and I wondered where it began. And I think too, I feel like there's it always makes me sad when certain flowers end up getting this bad rap, or they get kicked to the curb because they involve a little higher babysitting post-harvest wise or something like that, when I feel like there's so many flowers that are so easy on that side of it, but they're only easy because they can outlive bad habits, if that makes sense. But if you can put good habits into place, I mean, what a difference that makes for the end consumer. What do you feel like is the best source for information on post-harvest care? This talk about post-harvest is really enlightening, because I feel like it's something that's not discussed that much. Like I said, I'm wondering, is there a book or a place or a source that you would recommend for people who are just getting started learning about this?
I think the ASCFG, the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers, has probably the best thing for specialty cut flowers. It's their post-harvest handling book that you can get from the ASCFG. Also, the Specialty Cut Flowers by Alan Armitage and Judy Lauschman. That treats every flower kind of by species and has some very good information on individual plants, as does the first book, the Cut Flower Post-Harvest Handling ASCFG book. So those are the 2 go-to books for specialty cut flowers.
That's great. Okay, well, I think that's really helpful, because I know we could probably spend a whole day just talking about post-harvest of each individual bloom and timing and everything. I know I was watching a YouTube video you were in, and you were talking about yarrow or yarrow, however you want to pronounce it. And in it, you were talking about harvesting it later in the day
Right.
is actually better. I had never heard that before.
And that's the same with echinacea, because
Really?
yes, because and Frank can address it better than I, but it's because, go ahead.
Plants move sugars around to different parts of the plant during the day, and sugars and carbohydrates and liquids. And some plants like Rudbeckia, it's essential to cut them early in the morning in a hot climate like we have, and get them into the cooler, and then they'll rehydrate. But if you cut a Rudbeckia late in the day and try and put it in the cooler, it often won't rehydrate, or some of them won't. And the same with yarrow. If we cut yarrow early in the day, it doesn't matter what we try to do, it still seems to wilt. But if you cut yarrow as the very last thing of the day, put it into a hydration solution and throw it in the cooler overnight, it is as good as can be. But we found trial and error. All the stuff is trial and error. The yarrow likes to be cut last thing in the day.
And I've had echinacea just almost not stay hydrated at all. If we didn't pick it late and stick it to a hydrator and stick it in the cooler.
And I can only attribute this to some physiological change during the day as the plant is experiencing the heat and the sunlight.
Yeah.
And Texas, of course, is
It's always an extreme.
An extreme.
And we pick everything into a hydrating solution in the field. We use Chris Hall's OVB because it doesn't burn the petals.
And any other hydration solution works fine too. We're not trying to be a commercial here.
Right. Well, you have to play around with them, because some will burn the petals if they're out in the sun and the wind. But anyway, except zinnias. Zinnias are always picked into plain water.
Yeah, Chris Hall sells a variety of hydrator called RVB, which is for roses, and it'll knock out petals on specialty cut flowers. We've had trouble burning things. So the OVB is for specialty cut flowers. So again, trial and error. we've learned, and other products are made by other companies, and that, you know, those work fine too. You just need to try each thing on
Sure.
a trial basis.
One of the
Well-
tricks that we discovered early on was when we're at the farmer's market, like if you're out in the, you know, under a tent in the hot sun, having some hydrating solution in your bucket of water keeps those plants looking great while you're on the display in the heat. And that was a little retail thing.
I feel like somebody's channeling me right now and saying, what is the difference in a hydration solution versus your general everyday solution that might have food and the biocide and stuff in it?
A hydration solution is a surfactant. It's a soap-like material, and it causes the water to have less capillary action, or more capillary action, less beating up. If you imagine water beating up on a windshield, well, when it beads up like that, it's hard for the plant stem to take it up. And OVB or other hydration solutions break down that surface tension of water and cause it to be able to go up the flower stem faster and easier. So you get flowers that don't wilt because they're getting water faster in the field.
Okay.
And
Well-
that's so it's very different from the flower food because it's only a surfactant.
Well, I think that's probably the best explanation I've had for that ever in me doing this 30 years. So I appreciate that. And I think we're going to have to do a whole episode. I think I'm going to be having to reach out to some post harvest people and try to get a little more information on this.
Right.
One of the things I have to share this story because, you know, it's all what this is all about a lot of times. I don't know if you can imagine. So let's go back in time and let's imagine that it's a crisp October 31st morning and I'm just waking up and I have a DM from Pamela, and Pamela is sending me this beautiful picture of her field of marigolds. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And, you know, even though I have followed you guys on Instagram, the algorithm hasn't been very friendly about me seeing your images, which frustrates me. But at that point was really my first education into what you have built around this one singular flower in your part of the world. And I really love to dig into the power of marigolds as it relates to your business, because you guys are knocking it out of the park with this one. So I don't know where a good place to start is because you're doing so much, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
We could start with back in 93 or 4 when we started growing cut flowers. By 95 or so, there were some people coming up from San Antonio, women who were Mexican, you know, Latina women coming up and saying, we need to buy marigolds from you for this thing called Day of the Dead. And so we began to be educated about what Day of the Dead is. We offered them to our grocery stores as bunches, straight bunches of marigolds. And every year, more and more people come up from San Antonio, Austin, out to our farm. And every year we expand the numbers of marigolds that are being supplied to the grocery stores, because Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, has just expanded, has exploded in Texas. A couple of years ago, when the movie Coco, Disney movie Coco came out,
Great movie.
Frank looked at me and in the movie theater, because we went as soon as we heard about it, and he looked at me and he says, this is a game changer.
This is going to be big.
The world just shifted.
And what we need to understand, I know a lot of people are not familiar with the Mexico or Hispanic cultures of Day of the Dead, the celebrations, but the marigold in that culture is just as important as, say, a poinsettia or an Easter lily is for other holidays. It is a cultural icon. And the Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead celebration, is truly a heartfelt celebration where people go to the cemeteries, they remember their families, and it's a joyous occasion. It's something where everybody is happy. It's not a sorrowful celebration. And the other thing to remember, it is not Halloween. I mean, it's not just Halloween with marigolds. It's its own very significant cultural celebration of heritage and family And the flowers are key in this. And when we figured out that people in San Antonio didn't have a source for their marigolds, and they were driving to our farm, and then we realized that things like the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center and various churches and a lot of civic cultural groups were coming up and buying our flowers, and then they would come up and tell us their stories.
Yeah.
And tell us what they do with the flowers and have their all-night vigils and invite us to their vigils. And it got to the point a couple of years ago where one of the people who came up for many years brought a wonderful person who was a singer. And she said to us, I brought her up and we have a gift for you. And
so
she broke into song, and in
so,
our packing shed, she sang us the most beautiful.
Her gift was her song. And it was this a cappella voice that she just filled the whole packing shed. And it was funny because before she started to sing, our friend said, now y'all can just keep working. There was no way to keep working.
You had to stop.
Everything had to stop. And so last year they called or texted and said, hey, you still got flowers. Can we come up? Because sometimes it does freeze. Crazy things do happen. I said, of course we do. I said, are you bringing us another gift? And so this year she came, and we had moved all of our production packing facilities down to our big blue barn, which is our farm market, and that we built as a barn raising in 2006. And so in the barn during the weeks that we're packing marigolds, we also set up an ofrenda, a big altar for a Day of the Dead altar. And we have pictures of our past loved ones, our friends.
Our community brings pictures of their families. It's a community ofrenda.
And so these women came up this time, and she brought us a whole suite of songs, and she just stood there, and customers were coming in and out of the barn and stopping transfixed at this thing that was going on. And it's Frank and I said that for several weeks when we're packing marigolds, we feel like we have one foot in each world, the natural world of our flower farm, and then this
spiritual world
other thing
of Day of the Dead. And this past year, we kind of transitioned from packing our flowers at our home farm, which most people don't come up to moving our flower packing into the big blue barn, which is our retail market. So now we had this interface between the people who were coming for flowers and our flower packing. And we literally filled the barn daily with hundreds of buckets of marigolds. And people were coming up from San Antonio, coming out from Austin, and they would stand into the barn and then look around and say, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this in my life.
And Frank mentioned that they share their stories, and people will come up and respectfully say, may I take a picture of your ofrenda? Or they'll pray in front of our ofrenda, and we're an honor system at our barn, which means we don't actually stand there and ring you up for everything you buy. We expect you to show up with and put it with your honesty, and you're going to pay for it by putting it into our cash box.
Most of the time we're not even there. It's just a pure honor system.
Except when we're packing flowers.
When we have people come up at the Day of the Dead time, we've had people come up and they just look at us and they say, can I put a picture of my uncle on your ofrenda? And they'll pull out a little Xerox picture from their wallet and they'll leave it. And we put it up every year. There's one family that brings us cookies every year that are for the ofrenda, and they bring enough, they say, for you and your workers, and then enough for the ofrenda, because putting little food gifts on the ofrenda is important.
And then a secondary set of things that started happening, which is people who are some South Asian cultures, Indians, and people from various
Hindu, India, Bhutan, South Asia,
right,
have used. They've taken marigolds as a very significant flower for their cultural events, weddings, right, funerals, and significant events like Diwali and Batukama.
And housewarmings and baby showers. All those things require the use of flowers, and particularly of marigolds.
So we have started growing marigolds for the Hindu community in Texas also. And that brings a whole nother set of cultural learning and experience that the whole barn, the blue barn, just sort of embraces all of this stuff. And
right.
And you come into the barn and these people are, we had an event at the barn recently, and Pamela's brother came back in off the porch and said, I'm hearing 4 different languages on the back porch.
Right.
Because there's so many different people coming out.
It's like living in a kaleidoscope of color that changes constantly.
So the Blue Barn, when we built the Blue Barn as a community barn raising, we never thought that it would be quite the cultural hub that it's become for our community, but it is literally community owned. It was built by the community and everybody seems to have ownership in it. And we kind of take a hands-off, step back attitude about it. It's mostly self-serve. We mostly let people come and go. There's no charge. People say, can I go walk your fields? Can I take pictures? We said, absolutely. Watch for rattlesnakes.
Fire ants.
Fire ants. And they can't believe that we just make this space open to them for, it's just as a gift. It's our gift back. And then the Day of the Dead Marigold celebrations really kind of bring that to a point. We have become the farm to go to for marigolds anywhere. We're no doubt the biggest marigold producer in Texas, and we're one of the biggest in the country. I don't know who else would be growing more, maybe some California farms.
And a big part of our success there is back to post-harvest handling. Flowers are picked at exactly the right stage. They're in water. They're packaged and repackaged and put into the cooler, and they travel to the stores in buckets with water in them. And
so aside from our business of people coming up to the farm for the 2 or 3 weeks around Day of the Dead and Diwali, we also send somewhere in the neighborhood of 22 to 25,000 bunches of marigolds to the grocery stores in San Antonio and South Texas.
It's very intense, the whole experience on every level.
No, we pack marigolds for 2 straight weeks without a break. And we keep a refrigerated truck parked outside the barn and we fill it up. And every morning at 4 a.m, it leaves for San Antonio. And every afternoon we fill it back up again with hundreds of buckets, hundreds of cases.
Not only are we only an hour from the distribution center of H-E-B groceries, where we sell most of our stuff through them, there are 4 million people that live within an hour of the barn. And so we have an incredible market. We don't do just cut flowers either at that market to pull people out there. We also do garden plants and vegetable transplants.
So our business this year with COVID.
So we're expanding and changing.
It's kind of come full circle. We're now growing bedding plants and nursery stock and, plant material. We've become a plant nursery also again. And everything we sell at the market, we grow ourselves. We're not buying in plant material. And because we've had so much experience now, almost 30 years of growing flowers, we can tell people, well, we're selling you what we know grows here. And people come back to us and say, I've had the best garden I've ever had.
Right.
And so when COVID hit, our market with H-E-B got turned upside down because like everywhere else in the country, there was a run on the groceries and the grocery stores ran out of stock and they closed down some of their, I hate to use the word non-essential, but some of the other departments such as deli, floral, more hands-on kind of service departments,
right?
Because they were pulling online orders, everybody in the store was all hands on deck. So they called us up. H-E-B is such a fabulous company. They called us up and they said, listen, we're shutting down floral temporarily. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you. Whatever it takes, you let us know if you throw away flowers, you let us know what it's going to take. He said, we don't want to leave our vendors in the lurch. They were fabulous. We turned that around. It was the beginning of our season and we said, what can we do? The Dutch iris is coming on. We got a couple 100,000 Dutch iris coming. What do we do? So we immediately opened the barn as self-serve. We didn't go anywhere near it with COVID in March of that year. And we said, come out, get a bunch of iris and take another bunch free to share with somebody. And we started getting postings on our social media of people who found bunches of iris on their front porch. Mysterious gifts, and people started taking this iris share and running with it. And before you know it, the farm became a kind of a go-to place for people who needed to get out of their homes, out of their cities, and just have some space by themselves.
And because we were a farm, we could stay open.
We stayed open because we were a farm and considered an essential business, and we were selling tomato plants and vegetable plants. And the rest of the farm was wide open, and we had, all the proper social distancing and the barn doors wide open. It was all open air. So people had lots of space. They had lots of room to spend by themselves. And we've had people tell us just how essential it was that they had that space to go to. So going back to the community part of the farm, we didn't anticipate COVID being that, important to us, but people really came to the farm. It really became an important spot. And then they would buy vegetable plants and buy hanging baskets.
And that whole trend is gone, of course, as everybody knows, nationwide and worldwide. Everybody's, many more people are gardening and putting flowers in their homes. And
that trend continues this year. So our nursery and our garden center business has gone through the roof last year and this.
And so Blanco, when I sent you, that photograph about marigolds, it's because we'd been standing in our barn, and our Chamber of Commerce director is a friend of ours. And she came in and Frank says, "Hey, I've got an idea for you. Why doesn't our whole town plant up marigolds at this time of year? We could do it the whole month of October and really grow Blanco's reputation as the marigold capital of Texas." And so we all started the planning, and she grabbed the website, Texas Marigold Capital of Texas. Texas, isn't that what it is? Texas Marigold Festival is the website. And we all had some meetings, and we picked a date and put it out there to the other businesses in the community about how flowers can unite and bring people together and bring people off the highway to stop and shop and stay a while. Marigolds have this cultural use, but they also are really great for pollinators. The monarch butterflies come through. They're a dye plant. People use them to dye all kinds of fabrics and stuff like that. And so I would say we're all in the discovery phase still of what more can be said about what great things the marigold is.
But we're trying to make it so our town of Blanco has sort of an America in Bloom kind of program where the downtown square, when you drive through in October, is full of marigolds.
Right.
And we want people to stop and say, "Wow, what's this all about?"
And flowers make everybody happier. And they bring us together. And that's what we're always looking for, is something that'll bring our community together and elevate it and help us take it forward. So.
Well, I love that.
In these days when, different, respecting and recognizing different cultures and races are so important, it really brings together the idea that Texas has such a strong Hispanic tradition, and that we can celebrate that.
Right.
And we can all, really
we can honor each other and
honor
each other and our ancestors all at the same time.
I love that. I'm so glad you used that word honor, because I feel like, that's sometimes the piece of the puzzle that gets forgotten. And I feel like that is such I don't know. I love that. I mean, where I live right now is close to Macon, Georgia, and Macon is so funny. It's like people think of Washington, D.C. with their cherry blossoms. Well, Macon is also one of those cities that is like cherry blossom capital, whatever. And technically there's supposedly more cherry blossoms here than in D.C. And so when it's all in full bloom, they have the cherry blossom festival, and they have all these parades. They have a lot of things that go on. And just the just the community, people talk about having parties, it's like people get together, and it's like having a central place like that Blue Barn where people can come, they see the flowers in the field, they see, your heart, what you're trying to do. It's healing. I feel like it's healing in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we definitely need more of that. Now, in the spirit of growing marigolds, so Frank, how long does it usually take to grow marigolds?
Marigolds are generally a 12-week crop. They're pretty sensitive to day length. And so they naturally in the wild would bloom in the fall when days are getting shorter. So I have to work with that as we start marigolds now in July. We're seeding them next week. We start seeding marigolds for the Dia de los Muertos. And then I'll do that for 3 weeks for this late October period, so that I can spread it out over the last 3 weeks of October. As I get closer to the fall, they tend to bloom quicker. So I might get things in 10 or 12 weeks instead of 12 or 14. If you start a marigold seed in May, it's going to be a big green plant for a long time before it starts to bloom, because if you're growing it through the long days of summer, it's going to be less inclined to bloom. Those are called facultative day length responses. Zinnias, marigolds, celosias, they will bloom in the fall more readily than they'll bloom the rest of the year, but they'll bloom any time of the year given a long enough time.
Sure.
Other plants such as chrysanthemums will only bloom in short days. And so marigold will bloom anytime, but better in the fall. Chrysanthemum will only bloom in the fall unless you give it black cloth treatment or some kind of darkness to shorten those days.
Right. Well, that's
So we
exciting.
have to work with that. We've had to learn, because we grow 20 different varieties of marigolds.
Really?
From the pure white to a smaller bouquet type marigold to the great big orange ones, and every one of those has a little bit different bloom time. And so I've had to learn how to dance around those schedules and plant the big orange ones first and the smaller white ones late, because they bloom faster. Again, trial and error. You just learn. Many of the marigolds we grow now come from Thailand because of the Hindu market in South Asia.
That's where the breeding and the seed production is.
The breeding work's now done in Southeast Asia. And they claim that because they're growing them in these hot, humid climates, they're better for hot climates in the United States. I haven't seen that that's actually true, but marigolds do take the heat. We grow them all year round. We seed marigolds every week of the summer season. But when it goes into the fall, I seed hundreds of thousands of plants to go into the ground.
So I'm excited that everybody has time to get some. I mean, as we're releasing this episode, it's the same week that you're talking about doing all of your seeding. So I'm pretty stoked that anybody and everybody. I know I have marigold seeds. I guess I'm gonna go start some. I would have thought it was too late, but now I'm totally inspired here because I love marigolds. Pamela, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say marigolds, are native to Central America, which is why the Aztecs used them so much. But also every other flower that we grow in the hot season: sunflowers, gomphrena, zinnias, celosias. And we haven't even talked about the celosias, but celosias also figure in Day of the Dead celebrations to a lesser extent.
These are almost everything we grow in the summer is actually originated in South Texas, Mexico, and Central America. All these plants that she just mentioned, celosia, marigold, zinnia, these are all Native American plants from the American hemisphere. It's very interesting. And Texas is such a hot summer that we really are limited to what we can grow. And it turns out that it's essentially native plants. There are celosias, marigolds, zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers some species are all native to Texas.
Right.
Not necessarily the ones we grow as cultivated, but the ranges of those species, range all the way from Texas down to northern South America.
Lisianthus are Texas bluebells.
Lisianthus are a native Texas plant. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, because gosh, I could ask so many questions right now. I feel like, especially when you can embrace native materials or native familiar plant materials in your area, that's just always a recipe for success, because they're going to be the happiest right where you've planted them. And that's interesting. I didn't realize that all of those plants were sort of indigenous to that sort of area. So
yeah. Texas is the center of diversity for sunflowers. It's essentially where sunflowers evolved.
Right.
Texas and northern Mexico. And unfortunately, that makes it so that they are an enormous weed problem for us, because the wild sunflowers grow like crazy, and they'll get 8 feet tall in no time flat.
The other side of that is, on our farm, we only cultivate, let's say, 20 acres of the 60 that we own. The rest of that is left in natural something, weeds or trees. And the amount of biodiversity that you see, whether or not it's plant material or birds, insects, is unbelievable.
The culture, I like to do birding, so I keep track of what I see out there. And what we see is that our cultivated areas have enhanced the types and the numbers of birds and wildlife that we see on the entire farm. And so there's kind of a synergistic effect between what the areas that we cultivate and the areas that are non-cultivated and the increase in wildlife. We have gray foxes that actually will come to the edge of the fence sometimes when you're working and watch you. I actually had one singing to me a few years ago, just a few yards away, and it was giving me a little serenade while it watched me work through the door of a greenhouse. We get amazing birds. We get birds that come from the south that are on the edge of their ranges. We get birds from the desert southwest that come to Blanco, Scott's orioles and groove-billed anis and things that you wouldn't see in Central Texas are at our farm. And I attribute a lot of that because we have created an environment between, a lot of fresh growing material. We keep all of our aisles kind of weedy. There's just, kind of a farmscape idea that you keep the edges wild and your biodiversity is increased.
And there's water because, every little, there's water available because of dripping, irrigation and all kinds of stuff.
You'll see the birds on the ground drinking from the drip irrigation, and we provide all this access. So it's really become a magic place. We've turned what was once just kind of an open, dry pasture into this little tiny emerald oasis of
yes,
I would say nature and culture. It's been an amazing journey.
And that's why we share it with the Blue Barn, and letting people come out there and sit on the back porch and walk about is literally inviting them. If they have the eyes to see it, come and see it.
I love the way you said that. Well, okay, so there's some big things I'm curious about. One is, like, what percentage of your business, and I know it's a big percentage, is devoted to just bouquet production versus, I'm just talking cut stuff because I know you're very diversified with other plants now, but just with your cut flowers, what percentage is bouquets versus bunches of flowers, mixed bouquets?
That's probably 40.
For many years, it was close to 50%.
Right.
We've been scaling that back. We're doing more straight bunch material, and the bouquet production. Bouquets are there. It's kind of a paradigm. It's our biggest seller and our least profitable item. So to make any money on bouquets, you have to make a lot of them, and you have to make them effectively and very efficiently. So it's kind of the lead item for our farm. But we always encourage the stores that carry our bouquets to please carry a selection of the straight bunch material, because that's what we need to be able to kind of bump the profit margin up to be able to make bouquets. If a store just buys bouquets, that's the hardest way that we have to make money.
Right. And, this is the year that everybody's going to have to look at profitability. What's your margins there?
Right.
Because everything's getting harder and tighter. We have a very efficient bouquet team. There were 4 to 5 people picking flowers, and 3 of us making bouquets and bunches for 10 days straight. We did 720 bouquets a day for 10 days straight. More than 13,000 bouquets in the month of May alone. And it was just an intense level of output that's really not sustainable with such a small crew, but it just shows you just what you can do when you put your head down to it and work. The market demands. We have, there's a huge market out there.
We could double or triple our business tomorrow if we had more labor.
Right.
But the market is there for it.
Right. We can certainly grow it, but we don't have the people
labor is an issue
to help grow it.
We have a wonderful crew of guys who come from Mexico, and we get H-2A guest worker visas. So everybody's legal, and we've worked with them for 20 years, and they know the ropes, and we do that every year. I mean, we have scaled our team back. I mean, we talked at one time that we did more, nearly 40 acres, and now we're down 20. We've scaled back because we can't find help. That's the main reason our business is smaller than it was 10 years ago. It's certainly more successful. We could sell more stuff, but we've really gotten tired of just trying to chase down the labor issue. We've kind of set that aside. We've hit hit the size we want to be.
Right. Well, I know that that's an issue. I mean, I was just in LA for a month, and I don't know that I visited anywhere, maybe one place, but every other place I visited, they talked about that same issue is
Right.
one of the big issues. And I think this year, especially, probably more than past years. But I can imagine that, it takes getting used to having to be out, especially in Texas, southern Texas, with the heat and everything, to want to be able to deal with all of that. And I
Right.
just it's amazing though what you're able to do. I'm pretty stoked about it. So you mentioned profitability. Do you produce different size bouquets, or is everything pretty much one bouquet?
We pretty much standardize things.
We used to do 2 sizes of bouquets, but we can provide one Texas premium garden bouquet in one certain size, but at the same time, we may have 12 or 15 varieties of straight bunches that we also offer by the
Right.
bucket.
A big seller for us, if the bouquets are our number one seller, but the bunches of sunflowers are our next
Right.
seller. We grow a variety that comes from Israel called Superior Sunset, or also known as Dorit, and it loves the Texas climate. And we can grow a nice big bunch, a big 5-cent bunch,
Right.
and that's our number 2 item across the board. We can grow sunflowers for 28 weeks during the summer.
We have wintertime production as well with ranunculus and anemones. We've been growing ranunculus since 95.
We were one of the first people growing ranunculus in the country in undercover, and the reason that happened is because somebody gave our young son a little potted plant, not a ranunculus,
a rose,
and we planted it outside the house. In the following spring, a ranunculus bulb that was in that soil bloomed in February in Texas, and we looked at each other and said, "What is this all about? Where can we get some of these?" And we happened to see some anemones blooming at the Botanical Garden in Austin that same spring, and we kind of light bulbs were going off all over, and we said, "Anemones, ranunculus, they're from the Middle East, they're from Syria and Iran and Israel. That sounds just like Texas. Let's see if we can make this work." And we put them in unheated cold frames, and it just took off from there. And then we started writing articles and growing for market about our successes and anemones and ranunculus. And the next thing you know, you can't
can't swing a cat without hitting a ranunculus grower.
If you're every new flower grower these days is growing anemones and ranunculus, and so which is great. They're fabulous flowers.
One thing we found is there are some flowers that people will drive miles for, and ranunculus is one of them.
Ranunculus is one.
Ranunculus and peonies.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, so you said you grow 12 months a year. So like in December and January, which I would think would end up being the average person's off months, what are you producing during those 2 months?
Well, we gone full circle on the poinsettias. We're now doing a lot of poinsettias. Okay. But during November, December, and January, we do fall lilies for Thanksgiving. Greenhouses still have marigolds. And we do a lot of those little single flowered French marigolds, the tall ones like Harlequin. Yeah. And we make a lily marigold and whatever else might grow bouquet for Thanksgiving. And then we switch over to doing lilies for Christmas. And by the time January rolls around, we're in the anemones and ranunculus. So
we go indoors and do lilies and crates and things like that.
So we never stop. And we've got 28 cold frames, 20 by 96. So we're rotating plants around all the time in the cold frames.
And by winter, an H2A crew can only be here legally for 10 months. And so we don't have labor during the winter, except for maybe 1 or 2 locals helping out in the greenhouse production.
Very part-time.
That are part-time.
So you're looking at the entire production crew practically for the winter months, right here.
At least you've got the most experience.
If you've never worked 8 hours straight, bent over, picking ranunculus, you just haven't lived.
Right. One year we put out several weeks worth of tulip bulbs in some greenhouses, and we you stagger the planting so they'll all come off over a period of time. Well, then the temperature in Texas in February went up into the upper 90s, and all the tulips bloomed at the same time, and we were scrambling.
I was just, I don't even know if Frank was home.
Yeah, I was there working out of Parsons Farm, and Pamela was just picking tulips from sun up to sundown.
But when I walked into those greenhouses and saw 3 weeks of production all coming off at once, and it's the first time and the last time that I almost hyperventilated on the spot. And that's where the beauty of having a really close relationship with the retailer is phenomenal, because I ran in, shot an email off to the buyer, and I said, oh my God, we have this situation, and what can we do together? And 3 hours later, she had homes for we had stores lined up. And so we started picking and bunching and worked out just, sometimes you'll change your bunch size. We use UPC codes on everything. And so we try to keep enough different codes that we can slide in at different price points wherever you need to be. So if you need to put something on special because all of a sudden you have 6,000 what was it? 600 bunches of tulips.
We were in the tens of thousands
Oh
of tulips blooming all at the same day.
And then 3 days later, it was done.
It was gone.
It was like, wow, okay. We learned a lot of things this past year from COVID, and we have new mottos. We've always had the motto, things are really real. But our new motto is, you never say, oh, I got this. We can do this. We never say that anymore, because you don't want the great old universe to say, you think you got this. Let me just turn up the heat a little bit.
We thought we thought we had it under control this spring, and all of a sudden we had the week-long snowstorm that locked up Texas. And for a whole week, we didn't know what was going on. We were just in survive mode, trying to keep greenhouses from collapsing and keep the pipes from freezing. And a week earlier, it was in the 90s, and we thought, oh, it's going to be an early season, and then all of a sudden, kaboom! The world goes white. Same thing with the peonies up here in Minnesota. We thought we were going to have a gorgeous crop this year. It was the first year that all the fields were going to be mature, and we were going to be picking a couple 100,000 stems. And then on Memorial Day weekend, it dropped down to 18 degrees. And even for northern Minnesota,
that was unheard of. It's never happened.
Nobody's seen that here. It affected the nurserymen. It affected strawberry growers. It affected everybody around here. We were not alone in our losses. But every darn peony bud that we had out there, about marble-sized buds, they just turned brown. They're gone.
The plants look great. They'll be fine. But it was a total crop loss.
Okay, so but for people who don't know, okay, because I know because we've been talking, and I'm looking, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you might be seeing the window behind Frank and Pamela and realize that doesn't look like Texas behind them. So tell us about what you're doing up in Minnesota.
Well, we moved in 2010 on a hot August day. We read about a place up here in the Arrowhead, Northwoods, Minnesota, that was for sale. And in an ad for Growing for Market, and Frank challenged me and said, hey, you want to go, let's go buy a summer house. And I said, great. And, I swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And so we came out and we bought a cabin.
It was amazingly affordable.
In 47 acres. And I thought, oh man, this is great. I'm going to get my summers off at least August. Within weeks, Frank said, well, I don't know, we ought to be able to grow something up there. And I look at him and I say, I thought this was about a vacation.
Well, what happened is that we thought we were coming up here to go fishing. And we went to a little country bait shop up here in the North Woods because we're close to the Boundary Waters canoe area. And in front of the bait shop, the woman who owned it had planted a peony. And it was August 1st and the peony was blooming. And I looked at that just like the ranunculus years ago. And I said, look at this. There's something to be said here.
And not only that, it's late season.
It's a late season peony. It's blooming at the same time the Alaska peonies are blooming, but we're in the continental 48. And so Pamela's visions of using the word summer as a verb, as Molly Ivins would say,
evaporated.
She didn't get the summer up here. We put in 3/4 of an acre of peonies at the old homestead farm that we bought up here. And they took off. So within a couple of years, we were searching for some land.
The next year, Frank said, well, if we're going to do this, we need to do it for real, because the only way to ever walk away from Texas for a season is to make enough money when up here. And so we needed a bigger field. And so we went driving around looking for land. And Frank was driving down the road with the realtor in the realtor's car, and I'm behind them in our car. And they whizzed past this piece of property. And I remember looking over casually and going, oh God, there's the place. And thinking, oh brother. And so when I caught up to them, the realtor showing Frank this piece of land, I said, well, what about that other one back there on the corner? And we drove back there, and Frank went, I cannot believe this. This is it. So we bought it. It was covered in, it had been planted. It was a pine plantation. And so we had 10 acres of that harvested out, and it is full of peonies now.
This climate here is much more like Alaska than it is like southern Minnesota. We have boreal forest.
Right.
It's spruce and aspen. There are wolves and moose here.
And a lot of things won't grow here because it's too extreme, 50 below in the winter.
It kills most things. Everything I've tried planting around here as ornamentals, it might last a year or two, and then it gets to 50 below and you come back and it's gone. But the peonies just love it here.
Right. And it's obviously not a slam dunk because, you see, we just had that freeze.
Yeah. But we've often said in Texas that we like to farm the margins because that's where the money is.
Right.
And, it's really hard to grow cut flowers in Texas, but there's such a great market that we make it work. And the same thing with northern Minnesota. If we can make these peonies work here regularly, we're 3 weeks behind anybody else in the continental 48. So we can do an Alaska style late peony with ground trucking from Duluth right down I-35 to San Antonio, Texas.
Right. And we've had 3 successful peony parties at the barn where you send it all down to Texas. It's in our cooler. We bring it out on a Saturday morning, and people just line up and fill buckets full of peony buds. And it's a celebration.
But it's a learning experience about the climate here. It was 30 degrees just a week ago here.
Yeah.
Early July, after 4th of July, we had a 30-degree frost.
And it been in the 90s.
And now it's been in the 90s.
It's just whatever.
But that's farming anywhere you are. It's never easy.
Right.
Years ago, I read in Growing for Market a farmer in Virginia, Chip Plank, and his advice to farmers was farm like your life depends on it, because it does.
Right.
And it doesn't matter where you are, you have to deal with these things.
And his point was, if you want to make a living in agriculture, then you have to farm as if your life, it has to depend on it. Your life does, or you won't make that what you make your living from. And except for those years of $250 a month writing for Growing for Market, we've made 100% of our money selling the things we've grown.
That's incredible. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I would say we've been able to build our whole farm from just starting from 12 acres that was owner financed with $1,000.
And we have
down. And
we have 4 kids who are all grown and are now successful in their own right. And we've said, yeah, well, they're outstanding in their fields, but they're not standing in our fields. And right now, we don't even know what the succession plan might be, if any, for all of the things that we've built up.
We're facing the same issue many farmers are right now, which is, what do you do with your farm? You've built this up. You've got, we've got farms now in 3 locations. We're in our early 60s. We're ready to look at something else. We thought Minnesota was at something else until I saw that peony at the bait shop, and we got into the peony business.
Well, I think there's a difference. There is a difference. And I want to go back to this because you you asked Pamela if she was interested in a summer house, right?
Right.
You never said vacation house. I just want to
say vacation. I got her on a technicality, didn't it?
I love the loophole you created there. So yeah.
Our kids roll their eyes at us because we take on one more project.
We always said farming the way we are, we just keep building farm on top of farm. Every time we have a success, we roll it into another farm. And every time we have a disaster, we hunker down and follow that saying from an old movie, Galaxy Quest, where they say, never surrender, never give up. And we regroup and we come back out. But we just keep on going. And
every new challenge that comes, I remember thinking when we were faced with how are we going to pick and pack 20 plus 1,000 bunches of marigolds, plus thousands of celosias. How were we going to be able to do that successfully? And it's that old, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so everything we do almost every day is you look at the whole problem and you break it down into its component parts and you just start putting it back together. You just do what it takes as systematically as possible.
We try to make systems, and every
Right.
new job, every new challenge, there's got to be a way to break it down
And then the other
and
thing,
not get overwhelmed, because if you get overwhelmed and you start panicking, you're lost.
yeah, if you panic, it's done. I remember reading Eve, what's his name? The guy,
Keep showing on.
Let My People Go Surfing, his little business book about Patagonia. And he says, even in a disaster on top of a mountain, you always have time to take a few moments to
And
think it through, breathe, and assess the
Assess
situation.
what you're going to have to do to pull it out. When we had the big terrible winter storm, we could have lost everything, but instead we broke everything down into systems. We said, okay, we've got electrical this, we've got plumbing that, we've got greenhouses, we've got to cover plants. Let's break this down. And so we had a few days warning, and when it hit, we were ready as we could have been. And at that point, all we had to do was respond to any other challenges. But you break it down into the systems and make it work.
And so you never have it all, you never have all the answers, you never have it all figured out, but you just trust that if you just stoically do the work, it's something, you're going to come out with something that, is going to be deemed a success at some level, some kind of something.
Well, guys, I probably have more questions now than I did when we began, but I so appreciate your time. Thank you guys so much for being on the podcast today.
Sure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's nice to get to talk to you.